Hell is where God says, have it your way. If someone will not have God, then they bring their own hell with them.
If Christ is Lord, then he rules over how I watch TV, how I treat my children, how I treat my neighbors. He rules over everything.
Oh, you're breaking his heart. No, he's gonna break you.
What's wrong with you people? I mean, this is what's wrong with the Christian church today. We don't know who God is.
Give us some men who know the truth.
Put on the full armor of God and pray, 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 and pray.
Officer, you are not engaging in exhibiting constitutional behavior. You don't know the law, and yet you pretend to represent it.
Five Solo Studios presents Reformed Radio.
All right, welcome back to Reformed Radio, everyone. I hope you've had a great week. This time we're going to talk about busyness, also known as restfulness. So I hope that you get something nice to drink and just sit back and relax and listen to the smooth jazz playlist of Mark's voice. Because that's what restfulness is all about, right?
If I can get it to drop a little bit, maybe it's almost into Barry White territory now.
Smooth.
Can be restful.
Yeah, so we've been busy.
We've been very busy.
Yeah, and I think the world has been really busy, especially the West, from America and whatnot. I think, and constantly is pushed into our minds to stay busy. And I think this affects Christians as well. I mean, all the Christians I know are always on the go. And if you ask somebody, hey, how are you doing? I'm busy. That's real common. I'm sure you've encountered that too. And you were so busy that you were kicked out of church and put on a sabbatical.
That was the first thing that came to my mind when you suggested this topic is that. And I just kind of mentioned it, and before I could really finish the sentence, the elders had already voted on it and said it was mandatory.
Yeah, get out of here.
Yeah, get out of here. Go.
You've been here long enough.
Yeah, had
Go
enough.
Take a break.
Yeah. But it really, this topic is now near and dear to my heart because it's proven itself very quickly. 48 hours. 48 hours into this, I felt 10 years younger. I don't look it, but I feel 15 years younger now. It's been 4 weeks.
I think you've actually gone back further than that because you're wearing a hat now. Ladies and gentlemen, he does not wear hats. I've never seen him wear a hat. I come back and it's a hipster here now. He's had too much time.
Too much time. Yeah. Glad to have it. But yeah, very, very, very restful. I feel so much better, so much more rested. That this topic now is one I've been considering for 4 weeks now, and it is there's nothing like it. Tell you once again, what I love about God's word is it's always true, and it talks quite a bit about rest.
Yeah,
yeah,
it does.
And I have seen that. So thank you very much, guys.
They did the right thing. That's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So kind of what I wanted to do on this episode is there's 2 different aspects here of busyness or restfulness. And that's, you got the work aspect where you have a work ethic. And so we kind of want to see where does the culture stand on that? And also, what do we do with our free time? Where do we go with that? What does the world tell us we need to do with our free time? And what does the Bible tell us to do with that? So I feel like that's kind of where we're going to try and go, and we'll see what happens. So you never know.
Because we can draw a distinction between the restfulness we're talking about and leisure, right? They're not. They overlap somewhat, but they're not exactly the same. So
First of all, we're both a little different in age here. So we both represent different generations, right? I think that's a fair statement. Mm-hmm. And so my generation, the people I represent, I guess would be millennials is probably my closest one. When I look at my millennial brothers and sisters and fellow generationalist, what do you? I don't even know what you call it. Fellow peeps. I see a bunch of people that grew up with the internet. Like the internet, I remember dial-up. Like that was the big thing. That was part of my childhood, was hearing dial-up, and it's like, oh, you've got mail. It's like, this is cool. You know, I was there at the beginning of it, but I also noticed like before the internet, you know, with regular phones and all this, you had to tell your parents where you're going, get to their house, and then call to let them know you were okay. Like that's how it worked. It was very different. And I think part of that has kind of trained us to, I guess, have kind of a good separation, at least at the beginning, between when you're being super insaturated with content or media time. Social media is the big one here.
Sure.
Versus just being able to do things without a phone. We were kind of well trained, I think, for that. Or at least we were set up to be well trained for that. And then you had a generation that came after us, and that's different. They grew up with social media. Most of them, I would bet, they had a cell phone before they were 7 years old. You know, a lot of these kids, that's all they've known is this kind of fast access to knowledge. And I'm sure we'll get into that, but that's going to make a big difference on how your brain works and how you're thinking and how you're dealing with your time and what you can focus on and whatnot. But what I'd like to ask you is about your generation. What did you experience? What was kind of the cultural norms kind of in your generation, do you think, about being busy?
Well, I'll just say before we get started, I always take up for the younger generations because they're facing challenges now that, I mean, they get a lot of a bad rep from the older folks, right? Oh, you know, just go to work, pick yourself up, you know, get busy. You know, I hear it all the time, and I always take up for the younger generation because they did not cause the world to be the way it is, and it has been very, very much more difficult for them and the challenges that are there. And besides that, because of the internet, they're way smarter than we were, way younger. They just happen to know more because they're exposed to so many more things. So you're asking me then for the oldest. I'm Gen X. I'm right at the beginning of Gen X. And Gen X is really kind of the first latchkey generation, you know, where you had participation on a wide scale of mothers in the workforce. So we learned to manage, and I'm not speaking of myself necessarily, but as a generation learned early on to be independent and to manage busyness on our own. Okay? So for us, I would say probably the parallel to what you discussed with the phones is probably more like video games or something, and that was kind of our advent into the electronic world that you're kind of discussing with busyness. And that's probably that with maybe the VCR and cable. Like I was there when the first cable came in. It's like, whoa,
wow.
You know, oh, something without a commercial. Yeah. So we grew up as the remote control, believe it. I was a remote control when I was a kid. Boy, I put it on channel 13, right? And you would get up and turn that dial. We had, 3 channels plus 2 locals, I think is all we had. It was very, very different in terms of busyness electronically like that. To watch a movie, I remember the 16 millimeter, and that was literally putting the films on the projector and projecting it. So it was a bit slower. The phone didn't ring as much, It was there were no personal even computers. Those came, the earliest I remember maybe was, of course we got my dad didn't believe in all that stuff, so we got a late start, but I think maybe late 80s, early 90s when that stuff really started hitting. So I grew up without any of that, and life was a lot slower. It was just organically and mechanically a lot slower. It was a lot slower paced. It was definitely slower paced. You didn't learn things as fast.
Yeah.
News didn't travel as fast, even locally or internationally, and the pace Everything very, very much slower.
Do you think that's kind of impacted the people from your generation that you are aware of and just your close communities that in a positive way, or do you think that's kind of made it more susceptible to just jump into all the crazy social media stuff and the fast-pacedness?
Well, we were still kind of young enough, so when this stuff really started hitting, I was probably in my mid-30s, so we were really still young enough to adapt to it, even though we didn't grow up with it. But we have one leg in both worlds. As it turns out, we just kind of watched it all happen in real time. But I remember the dial-up you were talking about earlier, and that was like the space age to us. What? And I was amazed the first time started happening. That would have been early 90s, maybe. The old AOL dial-up sound from the modem. Yeah, it was like a whole other world to us. I remember seeing the first time I ever really consciously knew about the internet was seeing a commercial on TV, and it said, "What if you could read any book in the world you wanted just at the touch of a button?" And I said, "Whoa!" It's like a commercial that came on in the middle of a football game or something. I can't remember. And it was amazing to me that could even happen.
Yeah,
because we grew up having big reference books around.
Oh, yeah.
You just can't say, "Oh, well, what does it say?" Right? What does the phone say? If you wanted to look something up, you had to go like grab a dictionary or an encyclopedia. When I grew up, I didn't have Google or any ready reference. So in the hallway from the living room to the bedrooms, there was a giant bookcase with Britannica encyclopedias and World Book encyclopedias, and that's where you kind of went to get a fact that you weren't aware of.
No Google.
No Google, and even that pace is so much slower, right? Just the physical act of going and getting the right book first, and then opening it, and then going alphabetically to the subject you want to go to. Then you got to read it. It's very much slower, even mechanically, all the way around.
Yeah. It's just so crazy to see the difference there.
It is very crazy.
But now I don't know if it matters all that much anymore. I mean, I think even y'all's generation, my generation, even the young generation are all dealing with the same problem now. And that's this pacifier of quick access information that we all tend to have. I mean, most of us have a smartphone. Most of us have access to the internet real quick and easy. And now, I mean, Google's not fast enough. Now we have to have AI. We have to have somebody tell us the answer instead of us actually looking for the answer. Like it's just become so much more accessible and so much easier than it was obviously before with our grandparents. I mean, it's just night and day difference. And I think there's a lot of great things to that. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, we can get any information we want about scripture. We can get any information we want about historical things. I mean, it's great that I can talk to people on the other side of the world. People can watch this on the other side of the world. I mean, this is all great, but there's always a downside to everything. Just like food. You can have too much food and become obese. You can have too much drink, become a drunkard. I mean, have too much information, you become lazy, you become a slouch, right? And so I think that's kind of what we're going to talk through here is what happens when you have all this information? What happens when you have all this stuff competing for your attention? You talked about the ad on the game. Like, you get on the internet, you're hit with like 20 different things. If you're on social media, you're getting hit with like 1,000 feeds all trying to compete for you. And I think as humans, we're interested. We want to learn. We get that curiosity. And we're like, okay, well, what's that? What's that? What's that? And we get drawn down the rabbit hole. And so there's two different things that I'd like to kind of talk about with this. And that's busyness, kind of in our leisure time, like you were talking about. And maybe not just leisure, but just in our general time that we could have to ourselves, and then the work time. So with those two generations, I think there's a work ethic that's different too. So my generation, I kind of feel like this. Maybe it's just me, but I mean, I see a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, and they all kind of seem to say the same thing. And there's this idea that you have to continually fill your time with something to make yourself better. So if I have 10 minutes of time, I shouldn't just sit back and do nothing. What I need to do is work out, or I need to go learn some new theory or something related to my job. I need to go listen to a book, or I need to fill my time with something useful and beneficial. Or I kind of get this guilt. There's almost this shaming that's happening that's like, you're wasting your time. You need to be doing something. You got to fill that time up with something. And what ends up happening is you become exhausted. You're always trying to work, and you're always trying to do this thing to keep up with the Joneses. Except now the Joneses is on the internet, right? It's hard. It's one thing when your neighbor is Mr. Jones or whatever, and you're trying to keep up with them. But now you're keeping up with somebody in California with a mansion, and like, it's just completely unrealistic. And I think it's really misleading, and it's something that's kind of crept in that's at least made me, and I feel like most of the people I know in my age group have this unreal sense that you just have to keep working. You got to keep trying to get ahead, or if you're not doing those things, you're going to fail. And then you have the younger generation, which I know you don't like to pick on, but unfortunately it's really easy to do that. We'll give you grace. Don't worry. I know there's a lot of great kids out there. Don't worry. But they're kind of have this other kind of thought pattern, and that's like, I want to work 3 days and get paid for the same 40 hours. Actually, I want to get paid for 50 hours. You know, there's this ridiculous expectation, and I agree. It's all of our fault. We gave them this world. We weren't there. Our parents weren't there. Their parents weren't there to teach them the right way. Where they learned all this? The internet, right? They learned this from Uncle Sam. They learned this from their government schools. They learned it from just not being taught by good, strong parents who are going to teach them this. Because they may not know any better because their parents were failing. So you get a little bit of a cop-out. But still, there's kind of that mentality, that work ethic that says, I don't want to work, but I want to get the benefits of working. And then that also, I think there's this other idea that's popped into their mind, and that's kind of talking about with what they do with their leisure time, right? And that's they have the same thing. Their problem, though, isn't that they're trying to better themselves with their time necessarily. It's that they are so used to always having something in their head. So if you look at the kids who grew up on TV, they have really short attention spans because their brains have actually been rewired to accept these short blurbs before a commercial comes, or whatever the case is. So you can only focus for a little bit, and that's going to take a lot of work to get your mind out of it. So what does the world do? It gives you everything in really small, bite-sized nuggets, and that's all you can swallow. Yeah. And unfortunately, that's all they've known is that kind of world, that kind of information cram.
You know where that really shows up to me, where it's very, very easy to see, is go back and watch even really, really good movies from the 40s or 50s, maybe even 60s and into the 70s, and you will see...
Were there good movies in the 70s?
Well, I mean, yeah there were. But older, especially the further back you go, the longer the scenes are. And even establishing shots in a scene. So you have the camera comes onto a new scene and you have an establishing shot and it will show this. And these things will go on for what feels to us as modern viewers a long time. And especially the younger you are and the older the movie is, they look at it and I know they're just going...
Any day now.
Yeah, come on. I get it. I get it. Yeah, I get it. Because now if you watch a modern movie, that camera is constantly moving. It does not establish and take its time like that.
Yeah.
You think of some of the old spaghetti westerns where they just had a close-up of a guy's face for like a minute. This is all totally foreign to us.
Flies on their face.
Yeah. If you watch a modern commercial, I mean that thing's it is
always
clicking.
moving.
Yeah, it's always
like watching
moving.
a Jason Bourne movie. Just
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just and I think the science is pretty strong on this. Actually, you said that the electronics have rewired brains, and I don't think that's really science fiction. I think that's exactly literally what's happening. Yeah. That brains are being rewired or oriented to this fast-paced video environment.
Yeah,
definitely.
Something I was thinking of. It's like so like a kid. When you were, have a young kid, you might have a nightlight for them to help them go to sleep, right? Well, I think it's like for this day and age, you have to have content just to help you function. And that's kind of what their problem is now. And some of my generation too, I'm sure, maybe even more, but that's the issue that we're working with here. And it's going to take a lot of time to get through that. And I mean, I have grace for my brothers and sisters who are dealing with that. We're all in this together. Right?
Well, I'll just kind of speak out of my own experience. We have a lot of young folks, 20s, early 20s even, really what I think the generation you're kind of targeting with this maybe, that very productive, very hardworking, very dedicated, very just exactly how you would want them, right? But then there's also those, and I think maybe this term is appropriate here. There's a lot of quiet quitting going on. Have you heard that phrase?
I have heard of that, yeah.
Yeah.
You want to talk about what that means? Because I don't know what it means. I just hear it.
That's
a term mean, okay? I left a note on my desk that I quit.
Yeah, quiet. The old folks, all the hippies used to talk about sticking it to the man and all of that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And it's continued with the quiet quitting because there's folks that just think that they're kind of owed this or entitled to it, and that there's a lot of resentment towards society and the one percenters and the elite or corporate owners and all that kind of stuff politically and socially. And quiet quitting is just kind of hanging out and getting paid. Without being all that productive, you would do
the minimal amount of work.
Very minimal amount of work, and according to those who would hold of that phrase, that is justified for a lot of different reasons. Yeah, but so you get with anything, you get kind of a mixed bag. We have a lot of folks, young, productive, proud to work with them, gives you hope for the future, and then there's some not so much, right?
I hear more of them than I do the others, but I do know there are some that are good, and honestly, there's a lot more of them out there than is apparent. Yes, they're fighting against a huge wave of culture there, but they are standing up and doing some great things that my generation didn't do. And it's great for them. I think it's wonderful that that's happening, and there's hope for America, or whatever you want to think of it that way. But let's move on. We've kind of established that we have some messed up work ethics. We know that we have some problems with devices. We know that we have vices. How about that? And I kind of want to get to the point of, what does the Bible have to say about this? Like, why is this wrong? Like, what is the right way for us to work? And so I guess I wanted to bring up this story. Some of y'all have probably already heard it before, but back in Jamestown in the early 1600s, there's a man called John Smith, and he had a problem, and that problem was that people were not working very hard. There was the upper class there at the time who had just come over from the motherland, and they were here at the colonies, and they had silver spoons and whatnot, and didn't want to get down and get dirty and do all the work, and so they were consuming the food, consuming the goods without putting in any effort. And so one of the things that John said was, if you don't work, you don't eat.
You don't eat.
And he enforced that upon everybody. And that saved them. That whole year, that saved them. That got them out, because the year before they almost died. They were almost completely wiped out because they just didn't have enough food. And this time, they learned. They did better. Now, the question is, where did he learn that from? Now, I'm not going to go through a whole historical thing. There's a lot of great stuff out there for it. But I can tell you this. It came from 2 Thessalonians 3:10. So here we go. For even when we were with you, we used to command this to you. If anyone is not willing to work, neither let him eat. For we hear that some among you are walking in an unruly manner, doing no work at all, but acting like busybodies. Now such persons we command and exhort in the Lord Jesus Christ, that working with quietness, they eat their own bread. So that's where that came from. The Bible had already said, if you aren't willing to do the work, you shouldn't eat. Now we know that if you're a widow, or if you're sick, or there are reasons for you to not have to work, but for the most part, that's not you. You're a young kid. You can get up and go do something. You can go be that remote control for your parents, so to speak. You can go take the trash out. You can do some work, right?
Yep.
I should tell my son that. If you don't take the trash out, you don't get to eat tonight. That probably wouldn't work very well.
Yeah.
You can't pick up the trash.
Yep. Yeah, one of my earliest childhood memories as a wee tyke was, boy, I came in running in. Our dog had cornered I think it was a water moccasin. We had this little kind of atrium outside and the back door, and it was barking, and I saw it. It was either copperhead or water moccasin. I think it was water moccasin. It cornered it back there. And I ran in and told my dad, boy, go get the shovel and kill it. So here I am. He's 6 years old, 8 years, somewhere in that zone, 8 maybe, going out there scared to death, kill that poisonous snake. Yeah.
I mean, David was out there fighting lions and bears. You can go kill a snake. So the Bible has a lot to say about work. A whole lot to say. I just wrote down a couple to bring to this, but there is a lot.
Consider the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise.
That's one, yeah. 1 Timothy 5:8. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever.
Than an infidel, yeah.
I mean, that's a big deal. We talked about this previously, that, specifically from the viewpoint of a man, you're responsible for your family.
Yeah.
And it's your responsibility to work.
Mm-hmm.
If you're able to work, you need to be out there and you need to be trying to work to take care of your family. I mean, if not, you're an infidel.
Right.
That's a big deal right there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what's happened is the way this prosperity we've had there's all kinds of reasons for that and all that, but the rules are different right at the moment, and that people that don't work still eat and eat a lot and eat well. But I think when the rules go back to the way they used to be, that will have a little bit more teeth in it, than it currently does right at the moment.
Right.
Yeah. But it's a rule of life, what the Bible says about working and prosperity and sluggardness and laziness and ruin. I think these are principles that are as old as human society is itself and remain true to this day.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way God designed it.
It's the way it is.
He said you got to work. I mean,
got to work.
He said, "Here's your land, Adam. Get out there and cultivate it." Right? So it's been that way from the beginning. I'll give you just two more, and then we can move on to this. But 1 Thessalonians 4:11, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life and attend to your own business and work with your hands, just as we commanded you, so that you will walk properly towards outsiders and not be in any need.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying there's necessarily a promise with this, but there is. When we look at Proverbs, you see this is what you should do, and this is typically the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
You work, you get riches. You work, you get things that take care of you. You get what your needs met.
Yeah, if you can join it with discipline, obviously, and things like that, yeah.
Yeah. And then Proverbs 10:4-5, speaking of Proverbs, poor is he who works with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a son who acts insightfully, but he who sleeps in the harvest is a son who acts shamefully. So, I mean, that's just a taste of what Scripture has to say about work. And obviously, God is somebody who wants us to work hard, to do our best. And it's not, let me see how little I can work, but work your best. Do as much as you can. So with that, where do we draw the line? Where do we say that this was too much work? Where do we need to take that break and have that rest with our work ethic?
Well, let's set this in a historical context also, because the work that you and I are used to and we are used to in the 20th, 21st century is very, very different from the work 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, right? The 5-day work week is kind of a modern invention. When did that come about? Maybe turn of the 20th century, sometime in that area. I'm not exactly sure, but I don't think it's very old.
It sounds more like something a union would have caused.
I think before that it was a 6-day work week, and a lot of folks worked from when the sun came up and when the sun went down.
Yeah.
It's very physical work, very difficult. Men and women, everybody, kids. Right, child labor laws just started. I would say right around. Don't hold me to it. I'm spitballing here, but I'm going to say right around beginning of the 20th century, right in there somewhere. And so things are very, very different now. So when we go to apply this work ethic, we're already starting from a reduced ethic, right? From a reduced burden of work. Not to mention all these modern advances you've been talking about. I mean, I think washing machines probably came into vogue in the 50s, maybe. So before that, it was, and the modern conveniences that we have. Work was a very different thing. Going from an agricultural society to industrial now there's a lot of talk about the Middle Ages and how people only worked 5 months out of the year and stuff like that. Fine, but
when they worked, it was working real hard.
Yeah, I think they worked a little bit harder than we do. So we're already talking about a reduced burden set when we talk about our work ethics, and it's something we ought to consider. But we literally, and this is something you ought to always remember this in your Christianity and your life, is that you really live better than the richest person on the planet 100 years ago. You really do. You have air conditioning, you have cars, you have cell phones. You can get in a plane and go to New York and be there in 8 hours or whatever. I mean, it's just,
I mean, everything is relative, right? So, we do have farmers. And even then, I know farmers work super hard.
They do.
They do work really hard, and God bless them for it. Without farmers, we'd have no food. I don't understand why people hate farmers.
But they do it now with combines. So,
it's better now.
It's better now. When we talk about this, let's keep in mind that we're already playing the game on easy level comparatively, right? And it's something we ought to always remember. So even if I push myself a little harder now, I can remember that I still have it better off. Now, where we're challenged where they weren't is in all the distractions that you've been talking about. And this is where the busyness starts to come in, right? Because there's a difference between work and busyness. Isn't there a distinction there? Just busyness, right, is not work. Just because you're busy at something, you need to be busy at something worthwhile and good, which is a real distinction. And I think you were going to talk about this a little bit. But we are challenged in ways like that our forebears weren't.
Yeah.
And I think that's where some of this busyness comes in. It's very vogue today to talk about 1984, right? The book, Orwell and all that. And coming up, you talked about past generations. We were always scared of it. Cold War, all that kind of stuff. Here comes communism, 1984 and all that. We just knew it was coming. And in a sense it has, but it was really Brave New World that got us, okay? And that is, they just flooded us with the distractions. They flooded us with the prosperity and the stuff and the drugs. And just, so we have so much now that it disrupts our work because there's just so much going on. You were talking about some of the younger generation at work. One of the things I do notice is it's like this all day.
Yeah.
And see, how do you work when you're doing this all day? See, that's we are challenged in so many ways that even people that do want to work hard have that challenge, and it really is a challenge.
So for our relative work ethic here in our white blue class here, how much is too much?
How much is too much?
Israel worked too much back in the day. Remember, they didn't follow God's commands. They weren't resting on the Sabbath. They weren't stopping and really letting their fields and do all that stuff every 7 years or whatnot. And then God required that of them and kicked them out of it, right? So clearly God has a set schedule for us to follow.
He does, but let's hold on to that thought just a minute, because I think you've really isolated something that's really important here that takes wisdom and maturity, and that's leaving the Sabbath aside, because I want to get to that definitely. But leaving that aside, how much work is too much work? When do I become a workaholic, or when have I invested too much time in that and not enough in the other things I need to be doing, right? And not just work, but busyness. I mean, what's the sweet spot there? Because you're preaching here a work ethic, which I agree is very important in the Bible. In Proverbs talks about it constantly. In the other scriptures you mentioned, it's very, very important that I be industrious and a good worker. It honors God to work well, right? But then you're also pointing out, well, when does that become too much? I mean, is it 8 hours a day? I mean, it's a great question, Tommy. Where's the Christian wisdom in there that lets you know as a Christian man when enough is enough as far as work concerns? Or are you saying, let me ask the question another way, are you saying that I need to work harder for less hours and then devote myself to these other important things as well? See, before we talk about the Sabbath, let's talk about that. When it, for you as a father of 3 kids and as a husband, when is work too much? When do I need to stop? What's the line there?
Okay, so I think that there's a couple of things you got to take a look at here first. So first, we talked about it before on the man episode. We're responsible for our family. That is our number one priority, is our family. Now, first of all, to take care of our families, we have to provide. That means we have to have a job. But if I'm spending 50 hours a week away from my family to provide for them, then I'm not providing for their other needs, right? I'm neglecting my family by trying to take care of my family.
Right.
Now, for a season, that might be okay. And that's something you have to weigh and figure out, is that going to be the right thing to do?
But is there a magic number of hours there, or is each one a little different?
I think it's going to be it's going to be different, especially on the dynamics of your family. But I think the most important thing is you can't take your eyes off of Christ, right? If you are not spending time in the Word, if you're not spending time in prayer because you have to go to work, then there's an issue. And that might be your time management, maybe because you're slacking off and being on social media or whatnot. And so that could be part of the problem. Or it's because you have a job that you're doing too much work in. And maybe it's a time to not do a quiet quit, but maybe look for a different job if you can. And if you aren't able to, you're going to need to really work on time management and really seeking Christ to, as we're going to learn through Scripture, that He provides rest. And so He will provide rest when you're going towards Him and seeking Him. So to answer your question, there isn't really a number. It's all about finding what works best for your family, but keeps your eyes on Christ, and still allows you to take care of your family, not just physically, but spiritually and emotionally.
Okay, well then let's move on then to talk about the Sabbath just a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Sabbath is codified in the law of Moses, right? In the 10 Commandments. And it's a really interesting question to me, because I never hear anybody say the 9 Commandments. I just never hear that.
I mean, I hear the 11th commandment sometimes, but never now.
I hear the 11th commandment constantly, right? But even then, you don't hear them say it's really only 10 commandments, because when you take one away from 11, you get 10, because there's really only 9 commandments. But we in the church live like there's 9 commandments.
That's right. Yeah. Why? What happened to that commandment?
What happened to it? That's my question. Right? Is there 9 commandments? Are there 9 commandments, or are there 10? That is a question that I think needs to be asked a lot. The church has fought about it quite a bit throughout the ages. Right? This is not something distinct to us. But I will say, since you have brought up the generations, it was different when I was young. It was very, very different. Everything was shut down on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean,
there was nothing.
I saw
open.
that too in part of my childhood. Yeah.
It is very, very different from how it is now. And that was in the church and outside of it too. It was very, very quiet on Sundays, at least before noon. Mm-hmm. Maybe it loosened up a little bit after that, but it was, you still had the NFL, as I recall. I remember when I first got saved, my pastor told me that the NFL is no friend of the church, right? And that has remained true today. But you had a little bit of that going on, but not like it is today. And so something has definitely changed between then and now, when we start to think about rest and this day that God has ordained for rest. Mm-hmm. Now, it's codified in the 10 Commandments in the Law of Moses. It's codified there, but it's really a universal creation ordinance. All right, if you look at, I think I wrote down Genesis chapter 2. It's really codified. It's really declared universally to everyone in the first chapters of Genesis, where God creates the heavens and the earth and the 6 days of creation and all that. And then it said God stopped and rested from the work that he had done. Mm-hmm. Right? That's paraphrased, but it's close enough. And that there then is where the original ordinance comes from, and it's universal. It's just codified by Moses later, but it's already there, and it's for everyone in the whole world, and it's declared by God that this 7th day is a day of rest.
Yeah, I mean, Mark 2:27. Mm-hmm. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So that's further kind of instilling that. Like, this is needed. This was created, not because God needed to take a break. He didn't need to, but it was for us. Mm-hmm. And what I think when I interact with people on this is it's almost treated like it's one of those just overly religious kind of things that was done. Yep. Kind of like one of those, like a sacramental thing, It's just, that was back in those days when you slaughtered an animal. You don't need to do that. We can move on. And that's kind of how it's treated. Mm-hmm. Because there's not a lot of people I know that are actually going to not try and work on Sunday. I mean, growing up in honestly, 10 years ago, Sundays were some of the busiest days of the week for me. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm doing all this stuff in the church, serving. I mean, it's a long day. Me and the wife would be up at the church most of the day, and you're just exhausted. Mm-hmm. That's not a restful day, right? I understand that, for example, as a pastor, you're going to be doing extra work. But why is everybody doing all this extra work? Is that okay? Why is it treated like it's not a day of rest?
Yes, well, you do actually know some people that don't treat it that way. You do now. Yeah. and really, we'll start Saturday night and starting to be a little more restful, right? As best we can. And then, yes, I have to do service, but after that, it's my custom to go home and kind of turn everything off and be quiet, right? And rest, like the Lord has commanded, because there's 10 commandments and not 9, right?
Right.
This is This is just not a modern thing. I think the Puritans, one of the reasons they probably got kicked out of England was their insistence on the Sabbath. And they put out pamphlets and bulletins and when they could, laws to shut everything down. And I think everyone in England got so sick of them.
Go over there.
Yeah, it was
Go
horrible.
start a colony.
I think one of the kings put out an edict saying everybody has to dance on Sunday or something because they were so sick of all this pressure to stop. But there again, though, it's a commandment. Mm-hmm. So why has this become Sunday Fun Day? That's the phrase I can't stand.
Yeah.
We should do a whole program just on the Sabbath so we can really dig into the Lord's Day, what we would call the Christian Lord's Day now, rather than the Sabbath. But just ask the question, why is it that we're so adverse to the Lord saying that this is a day of rest? And that really all the other days of work really should be guided by the Lord's Day and not the other way around, right? Why is it that we're so adverse to this rest? You know, the Lord's rest is a precious thing. And I think he's given this us as a good thing for us, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I think it's funny, and I have a scripture here that kind of confirms this, but we have this thought, I think, culturally that says if you work more, you'll get more done, right? That's like, let me just keep working and I will be able to accomplish more, right? And we have Psalm 127:2. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep. Mm-hmm. God will bless you and you will be more prosperous when you give him that time, when you are resting as he's commanded you. And what that means is I'm not just going to go take a nap. I mean, I'm sure taking a nap on Sunday is great too, but the idea is you're resting in him. Mm-hmm. You're putting away Facebook. You're putting away all those distractions. And I probably just dated myself by saying Facebook. Whatever you hip kids do these days.
Get used to it.
Yeah. Whatever it is, you put that away and you're focusing on God on Sunday. And so that's kind of, when you do that, you're recharged. God is going to give you the energy and the strength you need, the creativity to get more done than if you had just worked through it. Mm-hmm. And that's something that's contrary to normal thought. Like, that doesn't make sense. I feel like if I just work 7 days a week, I can get this done. But how many times have you worked late into a project where you worked extra days on this and it was sloppy and it came out a little rough? Whereas if you had just taken a day to take a break, you would have got back onto it. It would have been much better. I mean, it's still, that principle's there because that's the way God designed it. He designed you to have to sleep, unfortunately, for some of us. Mm-hmm. And so you are supposed to take a break. You're supposed to take that rest. And specifically, we focus on him. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, specifically we do. And he's not stupid, right? You would agree. God's pretty smart, right? And he knows better about ourselves than we do. And he has put this there for a reason. He doesn't get tired, right? And there's something to piggyback on what you're saying. Yes, this is very similar to the work smarter, not harder type thing. And you're saying that if I take this rest, I'm better off in my performance going forward, right? But the other thing about it is that it also shuts everything off. It shuts off the distractions. It shuts off the things that I need a break from to perform better. And there's a great thing about the Lord's Day when you turn everything off. Okay? I don't have a cell phone, but if I did, I would turn that off, and I turn the computer off, and there's a little bit of quiet. There's a little bit of rest. There's a little bit of focus and recharging that is not there on the other days typically. You know, we theoretically could do that on Friday as well, but there's something about a regulated day of rest that just helps us perform better. It just really does.
So that, I think that's a pretty good coverage over work and work ethic. So let's get into restfulness. So you've already kind of alluded to it. What does Scripture say? Or maybe let's clarify it a little more. What is busyness in that, that kind of leisure time? And what does Scripture say we should be doing? Are we filling ourselves with nonsense in that time, or trying to better ourselves, or whatever the case is? Or should we be unplugging and taking a break, or whatever? I mean, the world's going to tell you in some cases, okay, that's when you go do yoga. That's when you go, meditate, empty your brain, whatever. And that's what you're supposed to do as a response to that. So, like, where do we go?
I think there's a distinction between restfulness and idleness, for one, right? You had quoted from 1 Timothy. Let me read from 1 Timothy 5 again. I wrote 1 Timothy 5:13, where it talks about idleness, because this is different from restfulness. Idleness is a bad thing, and it leads to bad places. Besides, this is talking about being an idle. Besides, they get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house, and not only do they become idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things they ought not to. So idleness is not what we're talking about. We're not talking about just laying around and being lazy and idle. Idle hands are the devil's tools, as it says, right? This is restfulness, which is a very, very different thing than just laying up or just hanging out or just doing whatever. And it's either really a distinction from leisure time. In my disposable leisure time, I have a range of things I can choose from that are profitable to do, right? Reading or whatever good habits to do are. Rest is really something different, though. Rest is more a quiet, still time. It's a time set apart where I turn everything off, where I disengage, where like the old folks might have said, tune out, maybe. But I shut everything down. I shut all the pressures down, and as best that I am able to, the distractions, the busyness, right? The lights and the sounds and all these things that assault me in the modern world. Doesn't mean I have to be a hermit. Doesn't mean we're going to cloister and be monks. It doesn't mean I can't answer the phone if it rings and all that. That's not what I'm saying. But there's this intended time to shut down and recharge. Okay.
But what are you doing? Are you just sitting there, not thinking about anything? Like, what are we supposed to do to be restful in those moments?
To be restful,
shut everything off.
Well, it is. I'd say it's person specific, right? What is it that takes rest away from you? Well, maybe that's the thing that you ought to not be doing during those times. Okay. What is it that drains you during the week? I mean, I like to read and do theology and to really but maybe there's sometimes when I need to quit that and just do something else besides that. Maybe I need to read fiction, a good fiction, instead of all this other stuff, right? Where my brain's not spinning and hammering, and maybe I need to just take a break from all that and do something relaxing with my wife or kids or whatever. That's different than that, right? It can. I mean, C.S. Lewis used to like to rest by taking a walk every afternoon, and that was his way of resting. Mm-hmm. And he would walk in nature and pray as he walked or think about whatever it is, but that's a form of rest because he's unplugging from the stuff that's normally driving him. Mm-hmm. And you need to isolate what it is in your life that brings you that pressure. I don't like to use the word stress, but if you want to use that word, use it. Okay, and even things in your leisure time that would maybe not cause pressure or stress, but cause distraction or excitement, and you need to unplug from those kind of things. So you could do it, and you could use your devotional time perhaps to read and to pray. I mean, we don't pray enough, right? We have too much busyness in our lives, too much noise and excitement and action and all that kind of stuff. So you can unplug from that and go to prayer. You can pick a pastime that you like that relieves you from that kind of excitement. There's a whole range of things. It's going to be person specific, and you have to discipline yourself to be able to do it.
So, but I guess in other words, when you're saying restfulness, you're saying just get outside of the normal pressures that you're feeling. Get outside of all the distractions. Basically, you're trying to give your mind a break from always thinking and being pushed and pulled and all that.
In our modern context too, because we're just surrounded by all this kind of stuff in a way that would have been different 50 years ago. Definitely.
Yeah. No, I get that. I like to drive a lot of times with nothing on.
Yeah. There you go.
My wife can't understand that. She's like, "What? Why are you doing that?" Because that's where I don't have to worry about anything. I enjoy the silence or the sound of the road for a little bit. Oftentimes I'm praying or thinking just about what's going on. That's a great example. I went to a conference, a parenting conference recently, and Bev was at that one. And I was listening to this guy. I can't remember his name. But he was talking about how boys are wired differently than girls. And one of the things he says is that when a boy is born, their left and their right brains have this connection that you're supposed to have there. It's broken. So boys are broken as soon as they're born, right? So, but what that means is it takes longer for us to process. So something over here emotional takes a while to get over here to something that's logical, or vice versa. And as men, at least in my particular case, that's where I get to have that time to just process. My wife starts asking me all these questions, or there's some kind of crazy emotional stuff going on. I'm not going to be able to process it right there. I got to go for a walk. I got to get away from those distractions, whether they're good distractions or bad. I have to get away and be in that kind of restful state that you're talking about, just kind of being able to relax my mind so it can process things. And typically that's a lot of prayer. That's where I tend to find most of my time when we're doing anything restful. And I love going on walks too. That's one of my favorite things.
We're both guitar players, right? So
Yeah.
do you find that
Very relaxing,
I find the pentatonic scale to be very restful.
Yeah.
I really, really do. So devoting to yourself, it's going to be person specific, right? Yeah.
But the idea is put away social media, put away the TV, put away whatever is trying to bombard you with constantly. I think what it comes down to is maybe it's different for everyone, I'm sure, but I think when I look at women in particular, there's kind of this, I need to do something. I need to fix this. I need to take care of this situation. I got this, and this. All this stuff is competing, and it's saying, put that all away, put it on hold so that you can relax and just kind of think clearly without
any of the
that.
pressures, whatever form they may take in your life. Definitely.
Cool. So, I mean, Scripture says a lot about rest as well. And just so we can be kind of fair, since we did a lot about work, let's talk about this. So, Psalm 4:8, in peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. It's the Lord who gives us rest. And again, I think that's kind of what we're going to see over and over in Scripture. So Psalm 37:7, be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Being patient means you're waiting, right? It means you're not going out and trying to take care of this thing. You're trusting in him to do it. It says, fret not yourself over the one who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil devices. Saying, don't worry. God's got it under control. I mean, when we are in that restfulness, we are looking to God to provide the solution for us. And if you're in that moment where you're being busy, you're being distracted, you're working that extra hard stuff to try and better yourself, you're not looking to the Lord, right? You're being distracted away from him, which is what all bad religions do, is they distract you away from Christ. And this is what we have to do. We have to come back. He is the shepherd. that I shout out when I'm with him,
Mm-hmm.
right? He always provides for me. He makes me lie down. That means he makes me be still. He makes me rest. And he makes me rest where I need to be, which is in him. And so that's just a few. I mean, I think we do need to have an episode specifically on Sabbath to talk about that. But we're not supposed to focus on God only on the Sabbath. We need him all the time.
It's the Sabbath ought to rule over the other 6 days, not the other 6 over the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it should set you up for the rest of your life. That's the purpose of it, and that's what it does in theory, and not in theory, in practice.
Right.
Yeah, I wrote down this one as well because there's a real contrast in rest between the wicked and the righteous. Okay, there's real contrast in the Bible. I wrote down Isaiah 50, 20, 21, but the wicked are like the tossing sea, okay, which cannot rest, right? When you look at the sea, especially in the Hebrew mind, what do you constantly see? Turmoil and chaos, right? But whose waves cast up mire and mud, right? The wicked, there is no peace for the wicked, right? So there's always this contrast of God's promised rest for his people and his obedient people. Rest is a really big deal, and it's all throughout the Bible, and it's the difference between chaos and strife and troubling, right? Like the sea. Why does the book of Revelation say, and there was no more sea? Why is that? Because there's no water anywhere? No, because there's no more chaos. There's no more strife and troubling. See, there's no longer any sea. And the wicked will always flee when none pursueth, right? Because there is no rest, right? They will say peace, 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 but there won't be any. There will always be strife and trouble. But God's people, his obedient people, are promised rest, right? And then the book of Hebrews goes into some detail about this and reminds us that Christ is our Sabbath rest, right? That Christ, the book of Hebrews compares Christ to Moses and compares Christ to angels and how much greater he is than all of these things that the Jewish mind knew were great, giant, good things, right? And he's even more than that. And it's the same thing with the Sabbath. He is our Sabbath rest for God's obedient people. And it addresses this specifically in context of the people of Israel going into the promised land, into the promised rest, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And the writer of Hebrews urges us to hear this and to not do the same thing, right? Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion. Who were they that heard and rebelled? Were they not also all those Moses led out of Egypt, right? Here's God is leading his people out of slavery and out of troubling and out of chaos, and he's going to lead them into the promised land for rest. And with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the desert? And to whom did God swear that they would never what? Enter into his rest, if not to those who disobeyed. So we see that they were not able to enter because of their unbelief. Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, and that's for me and you as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it still stands. The promises of God are immutable. Okay, the promises and purposes of God always stand, and his rest is there, promised in us in Christ even this day.
Yeah.
Let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. Okay, we don't want to fall short of this rest that you're talking about. It's a great topic, Tommy. Thanks for bringing this. Okay, because we don't want to fall short of it. For we have also had the gospel preached to us just as they did, but the message they heard was of no value to them because those who heard did not combine it with faith. Now we who have believed enter into that rest, just as God has said. So I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter into my rest. and yet his work has been finished since the creation of the world. Here's that reference to the universal creation ordinance of rest. For somewhere he has spoken about the seventh day in these words, and on the seventh day God rested from all his work. And again in the passage above he says, they shall never enter my rest. It still remains that some will enter that rest, and those who formerly had the gospel preached to them did not go in because of their disobedience, right? Therefore, God again set a certain day, calling it today. When a long time later he spoke through David, as was said before, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later about another day. Excuse me. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from his own work, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter into that rest, so that no one will fall by following their example of disobedience. So it's very, very important. But this is a good reminder for us that this is not like a playtime subject. It's not an option. It's not something we can do or not to do. It is God's rest is promised to us, and he expects that we enter into the promised land and take hold of the benefits of Christ that are laid out for us. Okay, at the bottom of it, what is rest, Tommy? I've been delivered from my sins, right? I've crossed through the Red Sea from Pharaoh, who is the devil. And God has delivered me from that into a promised land in which there's great rest. Yeah. Is there better news than this? Is there better news than God's rest and what it means in Christ, see? And so I ought to think we've laid out all kinds of societal topics that are all important, and political topics and generational topics, and all of these things I need to consider in the context of this great rest that God has provided me, because he's provided it and commanded that I walk in it. Right? This is really good of you to bring this, because it's something I think we ought to focus on, because as you've said repeatedly, in this day and age, especially probably with the younger generations, there's not a lot of it. It's not a priority. It's not seen as even important or something I'd want. What do you mean, turn everything off? You right? What do you mean rest? Rest, It's...
Well, to be fair.
Yes.
This was Nicole's idea.
Does she
Good job, babe.
think you have trouble resting from time to time?
No.
Okay.
No, but she sees this, and when she brought it up, I was like, that's true. We do have that as a problem in our culture, and I think that's everything we've talked about in this whole series. And let's talk about this whole series. The reason the culture does everything wrong is because they don't know Christ.
Yeah.
But when we know Christ, when we follow his law, we have that peace. We have that joy. We have that comfort. We don't have the anxiety. We don't have all these external pressures on us like they do. Like you just talked about how the wicked are fleeing when no one's chasing them. If it wasn't for the grace of God, that would be us too. But because of the grace of God, we have his rest. Yeah. And so for all of my brothers and sisters out there who have been dealing with this, who have been just busy, being constantly trying to do something all the time and so distracted, there is hope. You have hope. You have Christ. And in that we have our peace.
All right.
And that's really what I think restfulness is all about, is having that peace in him. We try to get away from distractions. We try to move away from those things. I think that's great to kind of limit how much time we're on our phones or whatnot. I think that's just good practice in general, so that we can really spend more time thinking about the gospel. As y'all are always saying, you have to preach yourself the gospel every day.
Yeah.
That's what we need to do. If you want to have peace, if you want to have restfulness, you need to understand the gospel, and you need to apply it to your life every morning, every evening, every day, so that you will have this rest that we're talking about. Because the reality is we aren't having great, peaceful days all the time. Most days can be pretty challenging, especially when you have a bunch of little kids. Like, I just told you to clean that up. What are you doing? You know, it's just, but if you are focusing on Christ and remembering what he has done for you, as you just went through all that, you have peace, and we can pull from that.
It's really there in the psalm that you quoted earlier when you were talking about green waters and pasture, or clear waters and green pastures, right? Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, even in that, he will prepare a table for me, right? Even in the presence of enemies. Say, there is a rest. Even in the worst things of this life, in the hardest things of this life, there is the rest of Christ. You can walk through this life knowing that there is peace and rest for you despite the circumstances, right? It's not all, you're right, it's not all about distractions and noisemakers and all that. It's also about the circumstances of my life. And I can walk through the hardest ones with a measure of rest. It is well with my soul. Isn't that how the old hymn goes? It is well with my soul, regardless of this stuff out there, right? You mentioned good things, wives and kids, right? But even in bad things, even in I lost my job, right? I can have rest. Even in somebody's persecuting me or picking on me, I can have rest. Even the car breaks down, right? I can have rest. Financial trouble, I can have rest. Trouble in any sphere of my life, right? Deserved or not, right? I can have rest through it. I can have peace through it. I really can. That's God's promise.
You know, how many times it's interesting how patience really seems to kind of parallel this, because it's usually when you're required to be patient that you get busy, that you get distracted, right? And that's where we need to really focus on Christ the most, is while we're waiting for him to take care of the problem, instead of just being the busybodies or just trying to get things done or trying not to think about it. Think about it. Think about God taking care of it for you. You know, just trust him. And that's hard. That's a hard thing to do, but he's faithful. He will come through. In his timing, just not ours.
No two ways about it.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up. Do you have any last words you'd like to say about this?
I think I'm good. Yeah.
Got the old glasses on. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us and hanging with us this long. And I know it's been great. I've enjoyed that. So thanks for coming on as usual. And we'll see you again. Get some rest, y'all.
Yeah.
Bye.